Now, we have asked to speak to a sitting Labour Member of Parliament. Sadly, none has been available, but we're delighted to be joined by the former Labour Member of Parliament, Chris Williamson. Chris, first of all, this seems like it is a perennial crisis for the Labour Party. Is it your view that under Keir Starmer, things haven't changed compared to where they were before? Still further accusations of anti-Semitism?
Well, firstly, let me say that it looks like George Galloway, the Workers' Party candidate in the Rochdale by-election, is on course for a historic victory there. But yes, I mean, look, the Labour Party has certainly changed. I mean, it's really moved very much to the right. And it really isn't offering anything very much different now from the Conservative Party. And this is really thieving our democracy because, you know, elections, democracy, politics should be about giving the British people a choice. And there is no real choice now between Labour and the Conservatives. Both of them are signed up to the war machine. Both of them are very much in support of the Zionist entity in Israel and the genocide that's taking place there. And both are very much signed up to an economic agenda which has desperately failed the British people. I'm talking about the kind of neoliberal economic agenda. And there's no real difference now being offered by Labour in the election whenever it comes, which we think is probably going to be in the autumn of this year.
What do you mean when you say that both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party are signed up to the Zionist entity? What does that... Because the last time I checked, both parties support a two-state solution. Both parties support a sustainable ceasefire in the Middle East.
Well, you know, they very seem to me, anyway, to be taking their instructions from Tel Aviv, because the actions that they're taking against Labour Party members who utter the modest criticism of Israel is deemed beyond the pale. And criticism of Israel...
Sorry, I really don't want to interrupt you there, but I do want to just... gather what you mean by modest criticism of Israel, because the two suspensions that we've heard about in the last couple of days have spoken about Jewish quarters in the media, have spoken about this conspiracy theory that Israel wanted its own citizens to be slaughtered in the largest slaughter of Jewish people since the Holocaust.
I mean, I don't agree with that proposition, but it's not anti-Semitic to say it. Indeed, it was carried in the New York Times, amongst other august journals. So, I mean, that has been speculation.
Hang on, Chris. So it's not anti-Semitic. What about using the traditionally anti-Semitic trope of Jewish quarters in the media?
Yeah, I don't know about that, but I mean, there's no doubt that the Zionist movement in this country does exert a lot of influence over political parties. And we see that, I mean, you know, virtually half the members of the Parliamentary Labour Party are members of the so-called Labour Friends of Israel. And figures I understand relating to the Conservative Party, 80% of them are in the Conservative Party equivalent. And that's very dangerous, it seems to me, for democracy, because, you know, the elected members of Parliament should be there to represent the interests of the British people and to put Britain's interests first, not Israel's, particularly when you see a rogue state like Israel, which is engaged in a genocide in Gaza. I mean, you know, nearly 30,000 people have now been slaughtered, children, tens of thousands. Saw a horrific image of the day of a little girl who's been blasted against the wall and legs.
We've seen various examples of people who've been able to criticise policy and criticise the actions of Israel. I can point to Jess Phillips, for example, who resigned her frontbench position. No one says she's anti-Semitic, but she's criticised what Israel is doing. Paul Bristow, the Conservative, he resigned as a frontbencher. He's critical of what Israel is doing, but no one's saying he's anti-Semitic. Can you see a material difference between these people and how they act and how they talk, and people who talk about Jewish quarters in the media influencing things and invent conspiracy theories about Israel's actions?
Well, there's no doubt that the Zionist movement in this country does have an undue influence on political parties, on the media and so on. But look, I mean, you look at the examples of people like Andy MacDonald, a member of Parliament, I think since around 2012. I think he won a by-election in Middlesbrough. I mean, he made a remark at a rally in support of the Palestinian people, where he wanted to see a situation where people living in that region, both Jews and Palestinians could live in harmony and peace together. And he was suspended and is still suspended. And I think it's unlikely he's going to be able to stand as a candidate. But look, there's factionalism going on here as well. And so what they're seeking to do is to remove as many people as they can who are on the left of the political spectrum inside
I know
the
you've jumped across to Mr. MacDonald, but I'm really interested about your view of Azhar Ali, who I'm not quite sure if you think he should have been suspended or not. Just on this issue of what he said about the Jewish media, on this issue of what he said about the fact that Israel almost wanted its citizens to be killed, do you think those are worthy of suspension and worthy of investigation?
Well, look, Azhar Ali is on the right of the party. He's expressed his support for Israel in the past. But this is an example, really, of where the Labour Party is yielding to pressure from the Zionist movement.
Sorry, was that a yes or a no?
About Israel. And what we're seeing is a conflation of criticism of Israel. And whatever you think about that conspiracy theory, it's not something I agree with, although, as I say, it has been carried in some detail in the New York Times, amongst other august journals, as I've said. But that doesn't constitute anti-Semitism. Criticism of Israel indulging in conspiracy theories is not the same as expressing, hatred or bigotry towards Jews. That's what anti-Semitism is, not criticism of Israel.
Chris, you're very, very happy to talk about how Israel is this genocidal/terrorist entity. I haven't seen much of you talking about Hamas and its actions in Israel and the number of people it brutally massacred, raped and killed, tortured even. Where's your disgust at that?
Well, the accusations of rape are false. The accusations of beheading babies are also false, and there's no evidence whatsoever. And indeed, some of the people that made those accusations have subsequently withdrawn them. Look, at the end of the day,
that's absolute nonsense. Okay, so let's just go with the murder. Let's just go with the brutal massacre and torture there.
Okay, well, look, I mean, in Palestinian resistance is an inevitable response to 75 years of Israeli oppression. I mean, Israel was created out of terrorism, actually, and out of a social cleansing exercise where 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homes and have been subsequently unable to remove.
So essentially what Hamas did is justified in your view?
It's an inevitable consequence, I think. Palestinian resistance is an inevitable consequence of the oppression and brutality
that we've seen from the Israelis. Disgusting thing to say. That is just despicable. Despicable, innocent Israeli people going about their daily life being brutally slaughtered by a terrorist group that is prescribed in this country and many, many other countries around the world.
Well, it's not just Hamas, of course. I mean, the Palestinian resistance... Hamas is a big continuum, but I mean, there's Islamic Jihad, there's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. There's a range of different Palestinian resistance groups who have come together. And look, inevitably, in every situation where you have oppression, particularly where you have a settler colonial scenario that we see in Palestine right now, there is going to be a reaction. And we've had 75 years of this oppression, 1967.
Chris, Israel going to be a reaction. Does that reaction include throwing hand grenades at families, about charred bodies of babies found with their heads lopped off? Now, Chris, you clearly deny that they were beheaded before they were killed, but whether they're beheaded before or after they're killed, these are beheaded babies we're talking about. We're talking about women who have examples of evidence of rape which you deny. We're talking about so much slaughter, people paragliding killing people at a music festival. How on earth is that resistance?
Well, look, I mean, many of the people that were killed on October the 7th were actually killed by the Israeli occupation forces. I mean, they scrambled Apache helicopters. This has been actually reported in the Israeli media. It's not just me saying this now, making anything up. This is something which was, as I've said, reported in the Israeli media. So many of those people, those charred bodies, were as a direct consequence of Israeli airstrikes and Israeli
It's very interesting that
fire.
You're so quick to dispute reports and evidence when it comes to Hamas and their activities, but you're very quick to leap on the idea that Israel is some kind of terror state.
But
I mean, it's very interesting where you lie on this issue. I mean, it's pretty despicable, actually, really, when you think about it, isn't it, Chris?
What do you think of the genocide that's taking place in Gaza at the moment? I mean, nearly 30,000 people have been slaughtered by the Israeli regime, and they are continuing their military operation. This is absolutely despicable. Look, what we need is a permanent ceasefire, but we don't just need a ceasefire. If we're serious about bringing peace to that region, we need to bring Israel to heel. So there should be an arms embargo.
Chris, we're running out of time, but I wonder if you could help us towards that ceasefire today. Would you add your voice? It might actually carry some weight in the region. I know you've been associated with a lot of people who are close to the pro-Palestinian cause. You've been friends with people who've said they've been friends with Hamas. Why don't you say to Hamas, put your weapons down and then perhaps release the hostages? Israel say they'll stop fighting if that happens.
Well, to be fair, Tom, that's an unrealistic suggestion. There's going to be resistance inevitably while ever Israel illegally occupies and brutally oppresses the Palestinian people. And so if we're serious about an arms embargo, making like pious statements like Hamas should lay down their arms, Israel should lay down their arms. And in order to bring that about, we need to be imposing an arms embargo. But you can't say Hamas should lay down its arms. No. Well, listen.
Why don't you say it now?
Well, if Israel were to lay down its arms, if Israel were to agree to a ceasefire, then I think, and indeed withdraw from the occupied territories, which they are illegally occupying. And, Hamas has said that it would accept, it wouldn't recognize Israel, but it has said that it would accept a situation where the country went back to the 1967 borders. That's what needs to happen. But Britain, what needs to be happening here, the British politicians need to be calling for an imposing, indeed, an arms embargo and no-fly zone over Gaza to protect
Thank you, Chris. We're going to have to leave it there just because we're running out of time. But thank you, Chris Williamson, former Labour MP.